Coming up on today's show, the Philadelphia 76ers have to trade Tobias Harris if they want to be serious about competing for an NBA championship next year. We're going to talk about that. Also, I put together some Tobias Harris trade ideas, but before we get started, let's hear from the people. If you want the Sixers to trade Toby, I want you to hit that thumbs up icon and like the video. If you want the Sixers to keep him, I want you to comment as to why you don't want the 76ers to trade him. Let's get into today's show. This is Philadelphia 76ers Now. I'm Chase Sr. Appreciate all of you for being here with us. If you're looking for year-round Sixers coverage, this is the spot for you. We are 287 people away from 10,000 subscribers. The last couple of weeks have been some of the most successful weeks in the history of 76ers Now. And if you're coming across us for the first time, this is what we can offer you all for free. Year-round Sixers coverage, NBA free agency intel, NBA draft analysis, news, rumors, analysis. That's all insightful, informative, and entertaining. And the more subscribers that we get, the more videos that we do. The more subscribers that we get, we do watch parties and hopefully live shows around the corner. So lock us in. It's 76ers Now by Chat Sports. So the purpose of today's show, talking about Tobias Harris. The Sixers checked off one big box so far this offseason, who was going to be their next head coach to replace Doc Rivers. And they hired a guy who I wanted them to hire, in Nick Nurse. If the Philadelphia 76ers want to get serious about competing for an NBA championship, they have to trade Tobias Harris this offseason. He is held this franchise back from getting past the second round and seriously contending to bring home another Larry O'Brien trophy. The Tobias Harris predicament. He has never been comfortable in his role alongside Joel Embiid, with Jimmy Butler at the time, alongside Ben Simmons, and in the last year and a half, alongside James Harden. For what he's paid and what he's expected to do, he is not a consistent enough scorer at a wing spot that I believe helps you win championships, because some of the great players in the history of the game who have won multiple titles play that wing position. He goes missing in big games. How many times in a critical spot has Tobias Harris been in the witness protection program? And since Elton Brand signed him to that deal, he has been on an albatross of a contract that has hindered the Sixers from building this roster into a legit championship contender. I will say this, though, about Tobias Harris. He has more value in a trade than you think. Tobias Harris is a good stats, bad team player. Prior to him getting dealt to the Sixers, he was having a career year with the Clippers. He was on the pace for being an all-star that year as a guy who could score effectively at all three levels and shot it very efficiently. If Tobias Harris goes to a bad team, he can easily be a 20 points per game guy, shoot 45% from the floor and 40% from three. He just needs a larger role. He needs the ball in his hands, and he needs more ample offensive opportunities, and he's not going to get that alongside Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and whoever else is Joel Embiid's co-star. Maybe it's a guy like Fred VanVleet if the Sixers don't bring back James Harden. The point here being, Tobias Harris isn't going to be in a role that he's comfortable with, even with the change of head coach in being Nick Nurse in that spot. The Toby contract has certainly been a killer, and Elton Brand decided to pay him over Jimmy Butler in a move that is going to haunt us as Sixers fans for a really, really long time, because he simply has not lived up to these contractual figures here. $32.7 million in year one, went up to $34 million, nearly 36, then 37.5. This upcoming season, the final year of his deal, $39.2 million. And you might look at the numbers and say, well, the numbers haven't been all that bad, Chase. In 4 full seasons with the Sixers, not including that half season after the trade, he put up 19.5 points, 19.5. But as you can see, the numbers the last 2 years have gone down as his role has decreased, as the Sixers traded away Ben Simmons, brought in James Harden, and because of that, the numbers have suffered. Now, I will say he was somewhat efficient this past year when you look at the raw numbers. 50% from the field, nearly 39% from three-point range, always been a pretty solid rebounder, but 14.5 points per game when you're getting paid between $30 and $40 million is not going to cut it. And like I said, I think Toby is a good stats, bad team guy, and he's been on a team that's been top 3 in wins in the NBA since 2020. And in the NBA playoffs, you might look at these numbers and say, Chase, they're pretty damn good, man. You'll take 18-8, 49% from the floor and 35% from downtown. But I am here to tell you that Tobias Harris, the stats are empty for him. They're just way too empty. When he needs to come through in a big spot, he goes missing. And for what the Sixers are paying him, that is just not good enough. But Tobias Harris's trade value is a lot better than what you expect. He's a good stats, bad team player where if he goes to a mediocre to bad organization, he can average 20 points per game on 45% shooting and 40% from 3. And there is value there with him being on an expiring contract. But if the Sixers want to be serious about competing for an NBA championship, they can't have him on this roster any longer because he has held this team back the last couple of years, especially in some of these monster moments in the NBA playoffs. That is the overarching point of today's show. So one word to describe Tobias Harris. I'm going to say missing because way too many times he has gone missing. So I've made my points about Toby, right? Why he has some value, the pros, the cons. Now let's segue to this. What would a Tobias Harris trade look like? Now, I pulled up the ESPN NBA trade machine. I kind of canvassed some of the rosters around the NBA to take a look at some teams and destinations that make some sense, as well as some players that the Sixers could get back that would still allow them to live in this championship contending window. So trade idea number 1. For Tobias Harris. It's a deal to the Dallas Mavericks in which the Philadelphia 76ers received Tim Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, and JaVale McGee. I like this deal for a couple of reasons. You lose some defense in trading away Toby for Tim Hardaway Jr., but I'd make the argument that Tim Hardaway Jr. is a more consistent and better offensive player and a better fit on the Sixers roster, hinging on whether or not they're going to bring back James Harden, if Maxey's going to be the number 2, or if it's going to be a guy like Fred VanVleet. The point still stands for Tim Hardaway Jr. You also do get some defense back in Reggie Bullock, who is a classic 3-and-D guy, and JaVale McGee might be washed. If you want to release him, you can. I'd prefer the Sixers bring back Paul Reed. I think that he could benefit from Nick Nurse's developmental tactics as a coach, but if he's your backup center or your number 3, you can certainly do worse. Hardaway and Bullock can both shoot the 3 ball, so Nick Nurse is going to try to build this offense around Joel Embiid. You need to have shooters around Joel Embiid to help bail him out because, as we see in the playoffs, he gets double-teamed every time he touches the rock. Hardaway and Bullock can help alleviate that by knocking down the trade ball. Trade idea number 2. This is a trade with the Charlotte Hornets. Tobias Harris is a classic Charlotte Hornet, isn't he? He'd look great in that uniform, in the turquoise, blue, and white. I actually like this package, too. You're taking a little bit of a risk by bringing in Cody Martin, who was not his brother Caleb Martin, who in the NBA playoffs has somehow turned into Paul George, classic Miami Heat developmental story. James Bouknight is a former lottery pick who hasn't really done much in his career, but I like him as a prospect, and I liked him as a prospect. He's bouncy. He can shoot the 3. He hasn't really had ample opportunities. Can Nurse help develop him? Can Cody Martin be a solid bench piece and maybe tap into a little bit of what his brother has? Terry Rozier, though, somewhat of an intriguing ball handler, a 2-guard, guy who can play off ball. Last year, he averaged 21 points per game, and the money works here as well. Really what this comes down to, a bad team has to be willing to take on Tobias Harris's contract, but it is doable because Tobias Harris is on an expiring deal. So if a team likes him for when he comes, they can re-sign him for a much lower price tag than what Elton Brand had signed him to. If they don't, they let him walk. And even though you lose a couple of players, it's 1 year anyway, and you're basically at that point where you have to rebuild your squad anyway. Trade idea number 3. This would certainly be a shocker. But look, let me explain why it makes sense. Sixers receive Klay Thompson. Warriors receive Tobias Harris. Now, for Philadelphia, Klay Thompson would be very, very intriguing playing alongside Joel Embiid. Klay Thompson is not the player that he once was. He had to come off that torn Achilles, that torn ACL. That has certainly zapped some of his athleticism. He actually had a really good year this past year shooting the basketball in the NBA playoffs. He went a little bit stale, went a little bit cold. He's not the defensive player that he once was when he was arguably one of the best two-way players in the NBA as an elite three-point shooter, one of the best that we've ever seen, and a guy who could lock down a player like LeBron James. He can still defend at a pretty good level. What Klay Thompson cannot do, though, is put the ball on the floor. Well, for Tobias Harris, he could barely put the ball on the floor because he was never involved in the offense because of the other players who were on the Sixers team. Klay Thompson as a catch-and-shoot player on the Sixers team makes a lot of sense. And if the Warriors, who just lost their general manager and president in Bob Myers, want to tinker with that roster and change things up a little bit, you have Klay Thompson going into the final year of his deal, Tobias Harris going into the final year of his deal, and if the Warriors are looking for another playmaker and a guy who can put the ball on the floor to give you as good of defense as Klay Thompson brought you, but more versatility with the offensive arsenal as a guy who can actually put the ball on the floor, maybe that trade makes some sense for the new general manager for the Golden State Warriors, who could be Mike Dunleavy Jr., it could be Kirk Lacob, it could be one of those two. Just an idea, wanted to throw that out there because the money does work. Which trade idea do you like the best? Which one makes the Sixers team better? 1, 2, 3. Let me know if you want to interact with me about what we talked about on today's show. You can hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at Chase_Senior. Appreciate all the support. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and keep it locked here for the best Sixers coverage.